Dzień dobry, witam Państwa na festiwalu Sektora 3.0. Ja nazywam się Piotr Łęgowski, jestem Head of Digital Media Campus i pracuję w Rynie Access Springer Polska, a tematem przewodnim tegorocznego festiwalu jest Building Trust i o zaufaniu będę rozmawiał właśnie z moim gościem. Good morning, David.
Good morning.
David is a Senior Vice President and Head of the Global Thought Leadership Research at Edelman Data and Intelligence and the author of the report we discussed today, Edelman Trust Barometer report. David, before you start the presentation, just tell me, to our audience, why the trust is so important and what you found in your report in 2022.
Excellent, absolutely. So Edelman studies trust for what I think and hope you will all believe is a very good reason. And that's in modern society, we delegate important aspects of our well-being to four institutions: business, government, media, and NGOs. So to business, we sort of delegate our financial security, our job security, our economic well-being. To government, we delegate our national security, issues around fairness, public policy. To media, we delegate sort of our information and knowledge. And to NGOs, we delegate social causes and issues. And in order to feel safe delegating such important aspects of our lives and well-being to these institutions, we need to believe that they'll act with integrity and with our best interest in mind. And that belief is trust. And so trust is really at the heart of individuals' relationships with institutions. Now, if trust in these institutions diminishes, then we start to fear that we and those things that we hold most dear and that are most important to us aren't in safe, reliable hands. Without trust, essentially the fabric of society can unravel to the detriment of all. And in terms of what we found in 2022, we are seeing some worrying signs around trust and whether or not that social fabric is holding up in the face of all the challenges that social institutions are facing this year. So by that introduction, let me welcome you to the 2022 Edelman Trust Barometer. This is our 22nd year of tracking trust in government, media, business, and NGOs. The survey is fielded online in the 28 countries that you see listed on the right side of this slide. The sample size is about 1,150 general population respondents per country, and they're weighted to be nationally representative based on gender, age, and country region. So what I want to do is sort of start the presentation by setting the scene. So the pandemic, climate change, inequality, the infodemic, the rapid pace of innovation and automation, and economic insecurity continue to test the system. And by the system, I mean the ability of business, media, government, and NGOs to meet societal challenges and keep countries moving in a positive direction. And as you're about to see, the system, especially in developed Western-style democracies, is just not performing well, and that's exerting downward pressure on people's trust and faith in their social institutions. In fact, when you look at our trust index, which is sort of the average amount of trust that people have in the four institutions, we see widespread decline of trust in many Western-style democracies. Germany, followed by Australia, the Netherlands, South Korea, the US, all saw declines of 5 points or more. And as a result of these declines, there is no longer, let me say that, no longer a single Western country that fully trusts their social institutions. So this, what I call this pool of distrust, this pool of distrust that many countries are finding themselves swimming in. Now, that's not simply a product of lackluster institutional performance in the face of what anyone would admit are highly complex, incredibly fraught, and certainly not easily solved problems. There are many other factors at play here that are catalyzing and exacerbating people's negativity. So I want to spend a little bit of time laying out, describing what those other factors are to give you a fuller sense of the challenges we're all facing. And the first one is that tensions and emotions are running high. After some degree of decline or modulation over the past few years, societal fears are becoming more acute. The second, Western-style democracies are experiencing a decline in optimism. There's not a single developed country that you see on this chart where the majority of people feel that their economic future is going to be better in 5 years' time. The third factor is that too many people are looking ahead and they're seeing a future in which who they are, what they have to offer, and what they've accomplished is no longer valued. Specifically, we found that 55% of our respondents are worried about people like them losing the respect and dignity they once enjoyed in their country. Now, ceasing to matter is not something that people take in stride. It makes them rail against change. It makes them fear modernity, reject globalization, and scapegoat immigrants and minorities. This fear of status loss and diminished importance also feeds perceptions that the system is unfair, that our institutions lack ethics, and that I need to take all I can get now without concern for future generations or even other segments of society. Now, I think this fear of status loss is ultimately a result of our societal institutions failing miserably at basic change management. In order to gain trust and foster a spirit of cooperation within society, our social institutions, especially those that drive change like NGOs, need to make that change seem less threatening and more inclusive. At the same time, they need to make the people who will inevitably be disrupted by change feel as protected and respected as possible. Change management is a form of trust management. Its purpose is to get people who fear being left behind to see opportunities or at least a place for themselves within a future that they currently regard with unease and suspicion. This combination of increased fears, lack of optimism, and perceived loss of dignity is the emotional substrate, the emotional energy behind populism, divisiveness, and polarization. But these actually are not the only things responsible for our current troubling trust situation. On top of all of that, people's concerns about disinformation and being lied to are increasing with a 9-point jump in the percent of people who think their government leaders are purposely saying things they know are false, and an 8% increase in people believing journalists are doing the same thing. Now, the fifth and final distrust driver is that both government and media are seen as divisive forces in society, exploiting divisions among various groups of people for commercial or political gain. So not only are these two institutions not helping, they're actually actively making things worse when it comes to getting us to pull together to address our challenges. And I actually believe that the number one reason why government and media aren't trusted is because at some level they don't want to be. Politicians and media channels have found success in casting doubt on their institutions by convincing people not in the trustworthiness of the institution as a whole, but only of that part of the institution that they control. In contrast, a business or an NGO can't succeed by sowing doubt in the institution, even as it tries to burnish its own image. NGOs and business don't feed on themselves, which is why they're more likely to be trusted and more likely to be seen as unifiers, two perceptions that we found to be strongly correlated. Now, lack of trust in societal institutions, it's not some sort of isolated, self-contained problem. It's not something we could shrug off simply as rhetoric that has gotten overheated. This problem, it has tentacles, it has sequelae that represent existential threats to our stability, our well-being, and our quality of life. Currently, because of the way politicians and media companies have chosen to operate, the money and the votes are at the extremes, not in the calm, objective, compromise-available middle. And until these institutions stop fomenting outrage, government and media will never regain trust. But beyond the immediate trust challenges this situation represents, it's also resulted in NGOs and business having to carry disproportionate responsibility to take on societal issues. Half of our social institutions aren't working. That means the other half have even more responsibility on their shoulders. Now, something that's often lost in discussions of trust is that trust overall globally has actually increased since 2012. The problem is that those gains have been unequally distributed. Essentially, all of the trust dividends have accrued to the higher income segment of society, the top 25% of earners, while the bottom 25% have languished at a low trust index of around 45. Now, the problem with that is that when two segments of the population are on differing trajectories, they're no longer equally invested in either change or the status quo. And that's destabilizing and has in the past, as we've seen, resulted in populist insurgencies, such as what we saw around the world in 2016 and 2017, when two things happened. The trust gap between the top 25% and the bottom were at double digits, reflecting two completely different trust realities depending on how much money you were making. And as you see here, the middle class was more aligned with the bottom 25% than the upper 25%, and that created a coalition for radical change. But I think an even more sort of pernicious and worrisome consequence of government and media sort of stoking divisiveness is that we're seeing the emergence of a culture of distrust. Today, nearly 6 in 10 people say that their tendency is to distrust something until they see evidence to the contrary. Another 64% say it's gotten to the point where people are incapable of having constructive and civil debates about issues they disagree on. This is an essential need in a democratic society, and we're losing it. And perhaps most troubling of all, 62% of our respondents said that the social fabric that once held their country together had grown too weak to serve as a foundation for unity and common purpose. Without trust, there can be no constructive debates or compromise. Without compromise and a willingness to see the worth and value of other people or ideas that come from outside one's ideological tribe, there can be no social contract. And without a social contract to rein in our baser instincts, life, as Thomas Hobbes famously described, is nasty, brutish, and short. And I think we're seeing evidence of that. Now, it's at this moment in time, amidst all these challenges, that business and NGOs are finding themselves being called upon to right the ship. And so you might ask, why is that? Why business and NGOs? Well, because business and NGOs are the only two institutions that are seen as both competent and ethical, with business having made gains in ethics and NGOs having made gains in both ethics and competence in the past year. In contrast, government and media have slipped further down both dimensions, and those decreases place even more pressure on the two institutions that are still working to sort of serve as a counterbalancing force. Still, because of its greater perceived competence, business is the institution that people are more likely to turn to address our problems and to instigate positive change. NGOs may be seen as more ethical, but they're simply not perceived as being as effective in getting things done. And at this point in time, people are desperately seeking competent doers, even those who may not have the highest ethical standing, rather than relatively inept but more angelic institutions. So let's spend a second or two talking about the expectations that business is currently laboring under, because there's some important implications within this dynamic for NGOs. So for a series of societal issues, we asked, is business doing enough, or is it doing too much and overstepping? And what we found is that across every issue we asked about, by sizable margins, people want more business engagement, not less, in societal issues. So the bottom line here is that the pressure on business to engage on such issues is pervasive and apparently not close to reaching its limit. Within business as an institution, people's employers hold a privileged position of trust. Fully 77% of people trust their employer to do what is right. The employer-employer relationship has this special status for several reasons. First, it's a personal relationship. Second, it's a local relationship. It's a part of your everyday life. Third, you have leverage over your employer. Via collective action, employees have the power to get their employers to change policies and get involved in issues. These attributes all spawn and drive trust. But beyond that, what makes this relationship special and important is that our employers have power and resources. They have exponentially greater wherewithal to get things done than most individuals. So this is not just a close, trusting relationship. It's a personal relationship with a rich, connected, and powerful other. The only such relationship most people have in their lives, although one, I would argue, NGOs could also aspire to have. There's no reason why my relationship with a philanthropic organization can't feel like a personal, local, trusting, and leverageable partnership with a more powerful other. Now, these specifics of the employer-employee relationship put employers in the unique position to supply employees with what they're currently seeking most: trustworthy information, reassurance about the future, and the opportunity to create positive change. It's going to be almost impossible for untrusted institutions to rebuild trust in themselves. In order to regrow, trust needs a toehold, and employers are one such toehold. So how do we break this cycle of distrust? How do we get back to a more stable, trusting society? Well, first of all, like it or not, business has become the anointed institution. People have placed it on a pedestal and conferred upon it responsibility for our future, as well as all of the hopes and expectations that responsibility entails. Yet the fact remains that business wasn't designed, nor are CEOs trained for the task of solving major social problems, or engaging in social engineering, or innovating around social policy. And so while opting out of being the people's champion is not an option for business, success is far from assured. Thus, the question is, can business reinvent itself to meet these new challenges? And in general, this is where I see an opportunity for NGOs in the role of equipping and facilitating business's ability to meet its evolving remit. In fact, for 3 of the 4 institutions we focus on, partnering shows up on their trust-building to-do list. Cross-institutional collaboration is a tide that raises the trust boats of NGOs, business, and government. So in theory, all of these institutions should be your willing partners. But just to be clear about this, these can't just be partnerships in name only, or that exist at a distance, or that are purely transactional in nature. These need to be intimate, symbiotic, seat at the big table partnerships. So a big trust building opportunity for NGOs is to become the engines of social change within business, helping them succeed in meeting the increased expectations being placed upon them to address local, national, and even global challenges in ways that are ethical, thoughtful, effective, and efficient. Now, as an additional benefit, in terms of getting your own voice out, with media compromise, employers look to be the best and most robust conduit to access people's hearts and minds. And this is a conduit that you're going to have greater and easier access to in the context of working relationships with business. In this information vein, when we looked at the most potent drivers of trust, the number one most potent trust builder across all 4 institutions turned out to be providing quality information. In fact, 54% of respondents say that they look to NGOs to be a trustworthy source of information about social issues and other important topics on which there's not general agreement in our country today. So your goal here is to build the trust and credibility necessary to be able to tell people what they need to hear and not be like media and just tell them what they want to hear. Now, the importance of high quality and trustworthy information can't be overstated, not just when it comes to rebuilding trust in specific institutions, but in rebuilding trust and faith in the system. And this analysis right here shows that being well-informed even has the ability to overcome the trust divide. So when you take low-income respondents and look only at those who are well-informed, average trust goes from 47 to 57, a 10-point lift. And the opposite happens when you take high-income respondents and only look at those who are not well-informed. Now, in doing this analysis, we define the well-informed as those who not only consume news regularly, but they vet and fact-check what they read against multiple sources, as well as they consume information outside their ideological bubbles. So being well-informed, having good hygiene, is not just about quantity of information consumption, but also the quality of that consumption. Because unless there is some agreement regarding what's true and what's not true, it's going to be almost impossible to rebuild trust. Good information is the first step in that direction because it blunts extremist thinking, it forces minds open, and it builds respect for others. Fostering good information hygiene is an area where NGOs also potentially have a role. So at the end of the day, having 4 well-trusted, well-functioning institutions makes a society better equipped to meet future challenges. A society that's less prone to extremism, where the vast majority are pulling together rather than sitting on opposite sides, pulling the country apart. So let me end by talking about what do NGOs need to do, first of all, to increase trust levels in themselves. And the first thing is to give people a sense of personal and societal progress. Help them feel like they're creating positive change with and through you. In doing this, emphasize your own effectiveness. Focus on results in order to increase that competence score. 2, meeting our current existential challenges will require major changes and transformations. And these changes need to be accomplished in an inclusive manner that protects people's sense of dignity and compensates those most likely to be adversely affected. Remember, change management is trust management. Don't just push for change, actively manage the change you want to see. 3rd, work through employers to reach hearts and minds and ultimately emulate and reproduce with your donors and volunteers the key characteristics of the relationship employers have with their employees. And 4, form meaningful and fully entrenched partnerships, particularly with business, which I think is getting in over its head and is about to be in desperate need for your help and expertise to meet its multi-stakeholder capitalist expectations. Now, just as business is being asked to operate outside its traditional purview, you too, as NGOs, need to lean in to think more holistically and to engage on issues that may be outside your primary mission. And this is because making yourself more effective and more trusted alone is simply not enough these days to create an environment in which we can all thrive and in which you can fully succeed even in your own mission. So what do you need to do to be addressing the broader societal trust issues that we're facing? Excuse me. First, act as an agent of stability. Act as an agent of stability. Fill the leadership void left by government and media. Importantly, this also includes redefining and defending the center. The center is not holding. The center needs a champion. That means, in part, cutting funding and support to agents of divisiveness and extremism. Until the rewards in society, be it money or power or influence, are greater for spreading truth than for spreading lies and information, and for facilitating cooperation rather than fomenting divisiveness, will continue to founder and weaken our societies. 2, battle the infodemic. Good information hygiene must be taught, must be nurtured and facilitated in parallel to cleaning up the information ecosystem as a whole. 3, close trust gaps by reducing systemic inequalities and unfairness. People will not believe and act like we're all in this together unless we're really all in this together. And 4, help to define and reinforce the social fabrics that have traditionally served as a binding force, a touchstone for compromise and shared interests in the countries in which you operate. An important part of this is actually teaching people how to have civil disagreements, how to compromise, how to accept ideas that are not homegrown. And I know how to consume information, how to get along with others. It's the stuff of remedial education. It's almost like much of the world has suffered a collective stroke, and now they need to relearn some of the basic skills of life. Still, you have to help them relearn these skills if we're going to shore up our fragile democracies around the world. NGOs have always been in the doing good business. Your work has always been important, and for many, it's life-changing. But I'm afraid that I've come here to tell you that you need to do even more good, and you need to do this good in areas and in ways that are new and perhaps somewhat uncomfortable for you.
David, it was really fascinating, but first of all, it was and still is a challenging year. We agree, of course, the pandemic that affects us around the world, the war in Ukraine as well, decline of in confidence in democracy. What happens in such democracy, especially here in Poland? We're just looking at the United States or Germany. The level of trust in democracy is shocking low. Is there any particular reason, or is just a few of them?
Well, so I think the dynamics I talked about are broadly applicable in most of the Western style democracies that I'm seeing. This idea that nobody is serving the middle or the center. For some reason, that doesn't seem to be where the votes are. That's not where the money is. Instead, what we found is that both government and media, if you appeal to sort of the extreme ends, either the right or the left, that is where you find the most success. And as a result, you have, as I said, government and media sort of feeding on themselves. They're pulling each other apart. And you just can't create trust in society as a whole if you have two of the institutions that are sort of undermining trust in themselves or their own behavior. Now, what we found in a time of crisis, and certainly the Ukraine situation could be considered one, is that often you initially get a bump in trust, and that bump in trust may not be because the institutions have actually risen to the occasion or that they have proven themselves, but it's more of an act of faith or even psychological necessity. We're under assault. These are dangerous times. There's a threat out there. I need more than ever to be able to trust my institutions. And so people's trust levels tend to go up. Then the issue is, do the institutions use that trust bump, that trust dividend or benefit, to do what they need to do to make things better, to make things right, to make people feel safe, secure, and comfortable? Or do they squander it? Do they fail to live up to expectation and come through? And then what we tend to find is not only do the trust bubbles burst, but you often end up at a lower level of trust than you began with. So situations like this, and we saw it in the pandemic too, are opportunities for institutions to sort of recover their reputation, but they're also opportunities for them to lose even more trust.
Do you think it's an erosion of the democratic system, or just our political leaders fail in some way?
I think democracies, by their nature, have certain, I wouldn't call them flaws, but they have certain points of weakness that can be attacked, right? So democracies don't work unless you can get a majority of people sort of all agreeing to the same thing, the same set of facts. The idea is democracies start by people agreeing to what the reality is, and then they debate the best way to essentially address that reality. Is this policy better than that policy? Is this investment better than that investment of tax money, et cetera? But if you don't have basic agreement about facts, like, is the pandemic real? Does a mask help? Is the climate change really man-made? Is it really a problem that could have existential implications? If you don't agree on that, then you never get to the point of actually solving the problem or talking about how to solve a problem. And as a result, nothing gets done. Things constantly get worse. And by the time it becomes so emergent that people finally realize something must be done, if it's often too late. In a more autocratic situation, the advantage is they don't need to worry about consensus. They can make sure that there aren't multiple voices. There aren't, one person on this shoulder saying, "Oh, don't wear a mask. The vaccine is poison. Don't worry about this pandemic." And the other person on your shoulder saying, "Oh my goodness, this is dire. There's going to be a worldwide pandemic. Millions of people are going to die. You have to do something." And then you're stuck in the middle of these two voices. That doesn't happen when there's centralized control of media. You don't have to worry about the Democrats and the Republicans, or labor and conservatives working together in an autocratic government where there's one party. And so in certain situations, the way autocracies work are in some ways more efficient and aren't prone to some of the same problems that democracies are. So I think, yes, there's to some extent that we have leaders who have come in who don't really necessarily have the best interests of the country in mind, but democracies are having a problem because the lifeblood of democracy is shared reality. The lifeblood of shared reality is a common source of credible information. And frankly, that's what was attacked first, was the integrity of the information system.
Speaking of media, what concerns me the most as a journalist in your report is not the lack of trust in journalists, but 67% responded that reporters and journalists are lying, and this outcome increased by 8 points than last year. What happened? How rebuild the trust to the media?
Yeah, that's a really tough issue, how to rebuild trust in media. So just to put that number, in context, I don't think that number is high because everybody thinks that all journalists lie. I think it's more about the fact that there's the journalists I trust and I believe everything they say, and then there's other journalists that don't, and they're liars. And not only do I have that feeling, but the journalists I listen to often attack the integrity of the other journalists. So not only do I hear two different voices, two different realities, and they can't both be true, so somebody must be lying, but I also have the people I'm talking to helping me doubt the others. And there's just no way that media can overcome that unless, as I said, the payoff matrix changes. Right now, media companies, which used to be news companies, and news used to be sort of a public service. You didn't expect to make money off of it. You did it because people needed to stay informed, and information was the lifeblood of democracy. Suddenly, what you kind of found is that, news divisions can make a lot of money. But the way news divisions make a lot of money is not by being sort of an objective source of facts. They make a lot of money by telling people what they want to hear, whipping them up, playing on their fears, getting them to distrust others. And that helps to undermine the social fabric. It undermines cohesion. It undermines our ability to see the value of others. Until that changes, until companies get penalized for spreading misinformation, until viewers start shunning media outlets that don't give equal time, that aren't more balanced, that aren't more objective, I don't think the problem gets solved. But ultimately, that's what needs to happen is we have to stop rewarding media. And that means business with their advertising dollars and us with our eyeballs. Stop rewarding media that foments outrage and divisiveness and is not objective.
Yeah, media and government in your report are perceived as divisive forces in society, but business and NGOs as unifying. It's a big challenge for business, and how business should use this opportunity.
Well, so it's to some extent it's both an opportunity and a little bit of a curse, and I think that's true for business as well as NGOs. So I think business and NGOs find themselves in this situation of having to do even more, to do things that they have not traditionally been expected to do because government and media have failed us, because they're not getting things done, because they're not seen as reliable. So it's a burden, particularly on business, because NGOs are at least in sort of the societal engagement, societal problem business, business much less so. It is a challenge. Now, the opportunity there is, especially as employers, business is in a position to make a difference, to help rebuild trust, to be a source of trusted information, to renew faith in the system. Also, because people are relying so much on business and brands to make things better, to help to address these problems, that becomes another lever that business can use to create stronger relationships with customers and with employees, frankly. So I, as a business, if I'm just making a product and it's a good product, yes, I'm going to have people who have a certain level of pride to work for me. I'm going to have customers that'll buy me. But if I make a good product or offer a good service, and in addition, I help my customers and my employees feel like they can use me as a partner to make a difference, that we're standing shoulder to shoulder addressing issues, whether it be equality or climate change or what to do in the Ukraine or any of the other bunches of issues, then my relationship with my customer and my employee is going to be even stronger than if I was only making a good product. And the way things are moving, I think we're going into a situation where a company can't succeed in the long run if all they do is make a good product and offer a good service. They're going to lose the talent wars because their potential employees are going to go elsewhere to companies that are making a difference and have values that match theirs. They're going to lose customers who have come to feel that they have more power to influence what's going on in the world via the brands they buy than who they vote for. And so if all you stand for is a good product, I'm going to go find somebody who has a good product, but also stands for other things that I think are important to me.
Yeah, it's fascinating. David, what surprised me most, it's a question how important is our employer, and in of course the building the trust and the role of the CEO. Yeah.
Yes. To me, the most important institutional relationship, not the most important personal relationship people have, but the most important institutional relationship people have is with their employer. If there is going to be sort of a place, a relationship that will serve as the seed for regrowing trust, it's going to be that relationship with the employer. We found, and you see this sort of most potently in the US. So in the US, we have our Democrats and our Republicans. They do not get along. They do everything they can to undermine each other. Republicans do not like Democrats and vice versa. The only thing, well, there's a couple of things they agree on, but one of the most important things they agree on is that their employer is trustworthy. It is a voice. It is an institution that cuts across cuts across ideological divides. So you look at almost any two groups, and one group might be high or low in their trust overall, or in their trust for government, or their trust for business. But the one thing they tend to agree on is that they trust their employer. And that makes the employer, or puts the employer in a unique position to get into people's heads, to get into people's hearts, to become that source of information, and to help sort of cool things down a little bit, be that voice of reason. I talked about this idea of you have to redefine the center, you have to defend the center has to become this key to success. Right now, appealing to your base, to the extremes, seems to be the key to success. I think business and employers can help make the center the key to success. And also a lot of the things we talk about, the inability to compromise or to appreciate the ideas of other people or people who may be different from us. We do that by and large in the work setting. We get through disagreements. We compromise in the context of our job and in the context of who we work for all the time. For some reason, we haven't been able to, or we don't apply that to people that see some of these behaviors and exhibit them in the workplace. Opportunity to help us hone those skills, develop those skills, and apply them more broadly outside of the workplace.
You stress in your presentation that the good information, quality information, can help close the trust divide. But quality journalism often costs. Don't you think that only rich can have access?
Well, that is one of the problems, right? That when you democratized information, it wasn't a complete democratization, because what you did is you democratized ability to create information, and you democratized access to lower quality journalism, whereas the better information often is behind paywalls. And as long as that continues to be true, it is going to be more difficult to close that income-based trust gap. We have to find ways to make quality information. Well, we have to do two things. We have to find ways to make quality information more universally available. But secondly, we need to train people how to be better consumers of information, how to recognize good journalism from bad journalism, how to recognize when they're being manipulated or not. So it's sort of a three-pronged approach. We have to clean up the information ecosystem. We have to make good information universally available, and we have to teach people to be better consumers of information. That all working together will help rehabilitate media, rehabilitate the ability to agree on a truth, and ultimately help rehabilitate democracy.
David, thank you. It was a pleasure to talk to you. I'd like to thank you for your all insights from the report. And it was David Bersoff, Senior Vice President and Head of Global Thought Leadership Research at Edelman Data and Intelligence. Thank you, David, once again.
Thank you very much.